why does the church have this obsession with homosexuality and sort of sex before marriage? It seems to be elevated above loving your neighbour, or being Christ-like.
That's sad but true in some parts of the church. And my response to that is sort of, I mean, I'm a historian, right? So it depends where we start. If you want to start with the contemporary fixation on it, then I'd probably start in the 1950s and 60s and the rise of kind of the conservative right and the moral majority in the US and corresponding movements here in Australia and Britain and stuff like that, where there was a sense that the church was losing ground on some social issues and it needed to pivot in order to gain ground and gain a sense of moral superiority in other areas. So, for example, in the United States, you've got the whole issue with the end of segregation in schools, and a school like Bob Jones University that is at a point where, you know, the government is saying segregation of schools is illegal, and Bob Jones, a Christian university, is saying no, you know, it's part of our Christian beliefs to believe that white people are inherently superior and people of colour are not, and so to be true to the Bible, we have to be segregated. And they lost that battle, thank God, because that makes you want to vomit in your mouth a bit, right?
What part of scripture were they getting that from? At least homosexuality, it's written in a vice list.
Yeah.
But like...
Well, it's not too dissimilar in that you have to ignore context and read in to find that, and they go back to the story of Noah, but that's a whole other kettle of fish, right? Anyway, they were losing the ground on segregation and on racial issues, and so there was a pivot basically to what are the issues that we can focus on where we can gain a moral high ground and become a political force, and two issues were chosen at that time, abortion and homosexuality. And you can trace that historically. Abortion is a funny one as well, because up until that point in time, the kind of standard accepted position in most of the church was that life begins at conception. But in order to argue theologically against abortion, you have to argue, sorry, did I say life begins at conception? Life begins at birth was the standard position.
Yeah. Oh, whoa. So
that was the standard position, was that life begins at birth. That's when you kind of receive your spirit and you're fully human. Because you're independent of your mother at that time. But in order to argue against abortion, they had to go back and theologically argue that life begins at conception and that you somehow become spiritual and fully human at conception, as opposed to birth, which was kind of the standard.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a mess, right?
It just sounds to me, just to sort of clarify, that people are using the Bible
for political power,
but to reinforce their beliefs.
Yeah.
As opposed to getting their beliefs from the Bible. I don't know if
in the context of that, there are many very sincere Christian people and people of all different faiths who sincerely believe, you know, that the Bible teaches, for example, that life begins at conception, and they go to something like the Psalms where it says, you know, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, I knit you together in your mother's womb, all those kind of things, and argue from that. But the reality is that there are other people who are deliberately interpreting the text in a certain way for political and religious power. That's just a reality. And that's why, like, you could go, you know, way back deeper in church history to find this obsession with sex, but it just depends where you want to start and what's the social context at the time.
I'm wondering, does it just come in waves? Like, I would assume that homosexuality everyone's always believed it's wrong, and now today they don't. But I'm incorrect in that belief, aren't I?
That is definitely incorrect. I think there's a couple of problems with that statement. One is that our understanding of homosexuality today is historically new, in that there is not, in many cultures, in the cultures that people would claim the descent of Western civilization, and I'm putting that in inverted commas because the whole concept of Western civilization is another construct that we won't deal with. But in most of the kind of history of Western civilization, in inverted commas, the concept of two people of the same sex being married, being in a lifelong committed romantic relationship, is not something that entered kind of into the social imagination, in the sense that relationships of marriage were all about procreation, all about property, all about legacy and inheritance and things like that. So, yeah.